What do dyslexics sound like? I mean, okay, it's an odd question, but just bear with me for a second. If you go onto social media, and it can be quite dangerous for your mental health, but if you go onto social media, you will see dyslexics and other neurodivergent groups discussing dyslexia, neurodivergence. The question is, if you're an outsider, if you're not one of these people, if you don't belong to one of these groups, what do we sound like to these people? Do we sound loving? Do we sound inclusive? Or do we sound angry and perhaps a little bit off-putting? One of the things I've been noticing is the tendency of groups talking about dyslexia to talk about us and them, dyslexics and neurotypicals. Well, this to begin with is a little bit of a divisive narrative, and it's something which maybe we want to be a little bit careful about. Whether we really want to talk about neurotypicals as though there is such a thing as somebody who is neurotypical. I don't think I've ever met a neurotypical person. And we were all a beautiful constellation of differences. And therefore, when I talk about neurotypicals, I don't know who exactly I'm speaking about. So the first thing is this idea of us and them, of dyslexics or neurodivergents and neurotypicals. I'm not 100% convinced that this is quite the right narrative. Have you ever heard dyslexic people or others, and by the way, I have you ever heard people say, why are neurotypicals so ... Why do neurotypicals say ... How do we talk to neurotypicals? As though the people who aren't dyslexic, the people who aren't a member of our tribe, are somehow, I don't know, ignorant? Does that sound great? It just doesn't sound great. I don't know. Then there's the idea of the superpower. I'm not certain that the superpower narrative is particularly welcoming either. We've got superpowers and you don't. Dyslexia is my superpower. What's your superpower? Oh, you're not dyslexic, you don't have a superpower. It doesn't sound particularly inclusive to my ears. Some people think it does, but not to my ears. And that's something I try to place myself in the position of someone who isn't dyslexic and ask what we might sound like to them. And sometimes we just sound a little bit... We sound like we're putting up barriers, you know? Another thing that I notice is that often there is this idea of this is what non-dyslexics think about us. These are the dyslexia myths. Everybody thinks that we are, or everybody says that we are, and then they'll name X, Y, and Z, which is generally quite low-hanging fruit, as it were. It's generally sort of not the kind of thing that people do always say about us. And most people I know don't repeat these myths about people with dyslexia. So if we're starting to basically give lists of myths that people say about us, give lists of things that people say about dyslexics that aren't true, if we begin with that language, not that the language is inappropriate, but if we begin with the language, we're often beginning by telling people what they say about us. And maybe they don't. And if they don't, they're going to listen to us and think, who the hell do you think you are? The language of you need to, pointing at people and saying, this is how you must, ... Again, it sounds a little bit aggressive. I don't know about you, but I listen to this kind of language and I think, God, if I was new to this subject area and I heard people talking to me like that, I'd probably leave. I'd walk out of that door and I'd close it. I wouldn't want to be lectured like that. There's a whole debate about whether we say, I have dyslexia, I am dyslexic, I'm a dyslexic, dyslexics, people with dyslexia, dyslexic people, ... Which way round do you put the language? Do you go dyslexia first or do you go person first? And some people get angry with each other about this. And the idea, honestly, the idea of getting angry with each other about whether I say I'm dyslexic or I have dyslexia, it baffles me. It really does baffle me. I want to let people express themselves in the way they want to express themselves. If one person wants to say, I have dyslexia, and another person wants to say, I'm dyslexic, and somebody else wants to say, I'm a dyslexic, great. I welcome that. I genuinely welcome that. And I'm not going to tell them they're wrong. But as soon as we start telling each other that they're wrong, and then we start talking to other people about inclusivity, well, what we've just done is we've just said we're not being inclusive. We're not allowing people to express themselves as they want to express themselves. And by the way, everybody else has to be inclusive. It doesn't sound right. It sounds contradictory, and it sounds like we're turning on ourselves. There's also the potential contradiction that you'll hear. On the one hand, people talk about dyslexia as look, it's counted as a disability under the 2010 Equality Act. You need to make these accommodations, otherwise you're breaking the law. And then on the other hand, people are saying dyslexia is a superpower, and there's nothing wrong with being dyslexic. And by the way, I believe there's nothing wrong with being dyslexic. But where we're giving these contradictory messages of disability, of different brain wiring, of superpower, there seems to be a difference in people's own narratives of dyslexia. And where people listen to us dyslexics from the outside, they might go away with the idea that actually we're giving completely different messages and we're talking at cross purposes and we're not talking together. Now, the main reason I'm saying this is that as a group of people, or as a member of a group of people who have been traditionally undervalued, traditionally looked upon as though we're broken, I think it's up to us, and I think it's up to people like us, to say to the outside world, okay, it's time to be loving, it's time to be inclusive. And if we talk the language of inclusivity, but our own language is, on the one hand, divisive, as it were, us and them, like it's us dyslexics and you neurotypicals, and on the other hand, there's division and argument within the ranks, then those people who are listening to us will get quite a poor view of who we are as a group, not that we are a group. And I think one of the big things we need to do is essentially focus on the love, focus on the inclusivity, focus on the fact that different people see us in different ways. We see ourselves in different ways. We see dyslexia in different ways. And instead of having this attitude that I'm right and you're wrong, instead of having this attitude that you must talk in this language, not in that language, instead of having the attitude that there is only one way of looking at dyslexia and any other way is wrong, or having the attitude that our way of looking at dyslexia is correct and your way of looking at dyslexia has to change. If we have this kind of attitude, what we're doing is we're sending a message of exclusion. We're sending a message of anger. We're sending a noise to the outside world. We're not opening our arms. We're not opening our hearts to each other, and we're not opening our hearts to the outside world. We need to obviously open our hearts to people, because that way we include them, we include ourselves, and we say to people, it's okay to have differences of opinions. It's okay to clash. It's okay to not have the same facts, essentially. How many people are dyslexic? Is it 5%? Is it 10? Is it 15? Is it 20%? It's okay to think like this. What it's not okay to do is to argue among ourselves and to argue with the outside world, to argue with this mythical group of people we've called neurotypicals, because it doesn't exist. There is no one who is neurotypical. I've never met anyone like that. And so what I'd like to say is, if we answer the question, what do dyslexics sound like? With the answer, we sound quite noisy and aggressive, then perhaps we need to review the way that we talk. If you like this video, if you like the things I say, or if you disagree with the things I say, in a loving and inclusive way, of course, please like, please comment, and please share. It helped me enormously. Thank you so much.